You
She
are
was given
nothing but a
5
common
minutes to clear her
opportunist.
desk before her husband's father, the CEO, dismissed her in front of the
Excuse
entire
me.
leadership team. Instead of breaking, she smiled and said, "Thank you." One by one, 22 colleagues quietly stood and followed her out. The woman who mocked her sneered until the legal director turned pale and whispered, "Get the lawyer, now!" The greatest love story ever, a husband who sacrificed everything for his wife. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to your very own family channel, Mr. Peter Stories. May the Almighty cover you with his endless mercy, fill your homes with unwavering peace, and crown your hearts with strength that never fades. May every woman walk with dignity and grace, every man carry wisdom that inspires, and every child laugh with joy that lights the world. May sickness never touch you, may sorrow never hold you, and may your days shine brighter than the stars above. I pray for your health, your success, and the happiness of your loved ones, that every step you take leads to blessings, every challenge strengthens you, and every night rests your soul in calm. May God lift you when you stumble, guide you when you feel uncertain, and wrap you forever in his love. If your heart is true, like the video. If your love is real, write, "I am with Mr. Peter." The congregation held its breath as Cheryl Luckett walked down the aisle in borrowed silk, her groom's family sitting stone-faced like judges at an execution. Every step felt like walking through fire. The church was magnificent, all soaring arches and stained glass that painted the floor in jeweled light. But the beauty couldn't mask the coldness emanating from the right side of the aisle. The Kappa family sat rigid in their expensive suits and designer dresses, their faces carved from ice, watching her approach as though she were a disease infecting their bloodline. She could feel their eyes dissecting her, the black woman in the borrowed dress who had somehow ensnared their golden son. Cheryl kept her chin high, her bouquet of white roses trembling only slightly in her hands. The flowers had been a gift from Laurie's college roommate, one of the few people who had bothered to acknowledge this wedding with anything resembling kindness. She had known this day would come exactly like this. Laurie had warned her, held her face in his hands weeks ago in their tiny apartment and said, "They will try to make you feel small. But you are the biggest thing that has ever happened to me. The only real thing in my entire life. Now," as she reached the altar and saw him standing there in his dark suit, his eyes glistening with unshed tears and absolute devotion, she remembered why she had chosen this path. Love, pure, unshakable, world-defying love. The kind that made you willing to walk into a room full of people who hated you just to reach the one person who saw you completely. The minister's words washed over them like a blessing, but Cheryl barely heard them. She was too focused on Laurie's hands holding hers, his thumbs stroking gentle circles on her skin, the way he was looking at her like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. When he whispered, "I do," it sounded like a vow to protect her against the world itself, against his family, against anyone who would dare try to diminish what they had. When they kissed, she heard his father's sharp intake of breath, his mother's barely audible sob of what might have been grief or disgust. She didn't care. In that moment, wrapped in Laurie's arms, his lips on hers, she was untouchable. They were creating something his family would never understand, a union built on choice, not obligation, on love, not legacy. The reception was held in the family estate's grand ballroom, a room designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto marble floors that had been imported from Italy 3 generations ago. Tables dressed in cream silk held centerpieces of rare orchids that cost more than Cheryl had earned in 6 months at her previous job. She moved through it all feeling like an actress in someone else's play, acutely aware that she didn't belong here, that every surface and every face screamed that truth at her. But Laurie's hand never left the small of her back, a constant reminder that she belonged to him, with him, and that was the only belonging that mattered. Guests whispered behind their champagne flutes, Cheryl caught fragments of conversations, words like inappropriate and what was he thinking and she must be pregnant floating through the air like poison. She smiled through it all, her face aching from the effort of pretending none of it touched her. Then came the toast that would change everything. Dawson Kappa rose from the head table, glass in hand, and the room fell silent with the kind of anticipation that precedes a public execution. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair swept back from a face that had been carved by decades of getting exactly what he wanted. His eyes were chips of flint as they settled on Cheryl, and she felt the temperature in the room drop. "Marriage," now he began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed room. Each word precisely enunciated is about union, about two families becoming one, about legacy and tradition and understanding where you come from, where you belong in the grand tapestry of history. Cheryl felt Laurie tense beside her, his hand finding hers under the table and gripping it tightly. "Some people," Dawson continued, his lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, "marry into families. They understand what it means to carry a name, to honor a heritage, to respect the sacrifices made by those who came before. They understand that marriage is not just about two people, but about dynasties, about bloodlines, about preserving what generations have built." The room was so quiet that Cheryl could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, could hear the rustle of fabric as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others. And here Dawson's voice took on an edge sharp enough to draw blood, "marry into delusions. They believe love conquers all, that passion can replace breeding, that feeling can substitute for belonging. They mistake temporary infatuation for permanent foundation." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cheryl felt her face burning, felt the weight of 200 pitying or gleeful stares landing on her like physical blows. She wanted to run, to disappear, to prove every terrible thing they thought about her by fleeing in tears. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her nails cut crescents into her palms. "My son," Dawson said, looking directly at Laurie now with something like pity in his cold eyes, "has chosen the latter. He has chosen a fantasy over reality, temporary pleasure over permanent legacy. He has chosen to throw away everything his family has built for a woman who will never, can never truly belong in our world." The room erupted in murmurs, some shocked, some approving. Cheryl sat frozen, her entire body rigid with humiliation and rage. She could feel tears threatening, could feel her throat closing up, could feel every eye in the room watching to see if she would break. Then Laurie stood. He didn't stand quickly or dramatically. He rose with the slow, certain grace of a man who had finally made peace with a terrible but necessary choice. His chair scraped against the marble with a sound like a sword being drawn. Every eye turned to him, the murmurs dying instantly. "Father," he said quietly, and his voice carried in the silence like a bell, "you built your empire on fear, on making people feel small so you could feel large, on crushing anyone who didn't fit your narrow vision of what family should be, what love should look like, what belonging should mean." Dawson's face darkened, a flush creeping up his neck. "Laurie, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm not finished." Laurie's voice was steel wrapped in velvet, polite but absolutely immovable. He reached down and took Cheryl's hand, pulling her gently to her feet beside him. She rose on trembling legs, her heart hammering, not knowing what he was about to do, but trusting him completely. "This woman you've just insulted in front of everyone who matters to you is the love of my life. She is brilliant, kind, strong, and more worthy of respect than anyone in this room, including you, especially you." Cheryl's eyes flooded with tears, but these were different tears, not shame, but something fierce and overwhelming. "You built an empire on fear and manipulation," Laurie continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "You taught me that power meant controlling others, that strength meant never showing weakness, that family was about obligation rather than love. You were wrong about everything that matters. The room was utterly silent now. Guests frozen with champagne halfway to their lips, forks suspended over untouched cake. "She is my life," Laurie said, turning to look at Cheryl with such tenderness that she felt her knees go weak. "She is my choice, my partner, my future, my everything. And if you cannot accept that, if you cannot treat her with the respect she deserves, then you are not my family." "She is." He turned back to his father. End of discussion. Dawson stood there, his face purple with rage and something that might have been fear. His wife clutched at his arm, whispering urgently, but he shook her off. The power in the room had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The patriarch, who had ruled with absolute authority, was suddenly publicly losing control. Laurie looked at Cheryl then, and the look in his eyes made her forget the room, the people, the humiliation. He looked at her like she was the sun, and he had been living in darkness his entire life. Like she was oxygen and he had been drowning. Like she was the first real thing he had ever touched. "Let's go home," he whispered, just for her. They walked out together, hand in hand, down the long aisle between tables of shocked guests. Cheryl kept her head high, kept her steps measured and dignified, refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. Behind them, the room erupted in chaos. Voices rising, arguments breaking out, Dawson shouting something about ingratitude and betrayal. But they didn't look back. They left 200 guests sitting in stunned silence. Left the 7-tier cake untouched with its little bride and groom figurines that looked nothing like them. Left the father who had just tried to destroy them, standing alone at the head table, with his glass still raised in a toast that had become a declaration of war. That night, in the small hotel room Laurie had booked for their wedding night, not the grand suite his family had offered with strings attached, but a simple room with clean sheets and privacy and freedom, they held each other in the darkness. "No matter what they say," Laurie whispered against her hair, his arms wrapped around her like he was trying to shield her from the entire world. "We stand together, you and me against everything. That's all that matters. That's all that's ever mattered." Cheryl pulled back just enough to see his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I was so scared," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Standing there, listening to him tear me apart in front of everyone, feeling all those eyes on me, all that judgment. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to prove them right by running away. But you didn't run. No, because you stood up." She touched his face with trembling fingers, tracing the line of his jaw, the curve of his lips. "You chose me. In front of everyone who matters to you, everyone who has power over your future. You chose me. I will always choose you." He caught her hand and pressed it against his chest, where she could feel his heart beating strong and steady. "Every single day, every single moment for the rest of my life, I will choose you over everything else. Over money, over comfort, over their approval, over the easy path. You are my family now, the only family that matters." They made love that night with a tenderness born of defiance, their bodies speaking promises their mouths had already made. Every touch was a rebellion, every kiss was a declaration, every whispered word was a vow. Afterward, wrapped in the hotel's plain white sheets, Cheryl felt something shift inside her chest. The fear that had lived there since she first met the Kappa family, the anxiety that had whispered that she wasn't good enough, wasn't right enough, wasn't worthy enough, it began to transform into something else. Fire. Pure, cleansing, strengthening fire. "He wants to break us," she said into the darkness. Her voice steady now. Laurie's arms tightened around her. "He can't break what he doesn't understand. He thinks love is a weakness, a liability, something that makes you vulnerable. He has no idea it's the strongest thing in the world. No idea that two people who truly choose each other become invincible. What happens now? You know he won't let this go. He'll come after us. After me. Now." Laurie kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Now we live, we love. We build a life together that's ours, not his. We prove them all wrong. Not by fighting them, but by being so genuinely happy that their hatred becomes irrelevant. The next morning, they woke to 17 missed calls from Dawson and a terse message delivered by courier to their hotel room. The envelope was heavy, expensive, marked with the Capper family seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed in cold, formal language. Laurie was expected at the family company headquarters immediately. His position awaited him, and Cheryl, the message stated with barely concealed contempt, would be given an opportunity to prove herself useful to the family enterprise. Laurie read the message aloud, his voice tight with anger, then crumpled it slowly in his fist. He's setting a trap. He's going to make your life hell, try to prove you're not good enough, try to break us from the inside. I know. Cheryl looked at him steadily, the fire from last night still burning in her chest. But we walk into it anyway, don't we? Because refusing means losing everything. Refusing means giving up before the fight even starts. Accepting means watching them try to destroy you every single day. It means enduring their cruelty, their mockery, their constant efforts to make you quit. Let them try. The fire burned brighter, hotter. I didn't survive everything in my life. Every moment of being told I didn't belong, every door slammed in my face, every person who looked at me and saw someone less than just to let your father's approval define me. If he wants to test me, I'll pass every test. And when I do, when I prove myself again and again and again, he'll have to watch me succeed despite his hatred. That will hurt him more than any rebellion ever could. Laurie pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers, their breath mingling. You are the strongest person I have ever known. The bravest, the most magnificent. I learned from the best. She smiled against his lips. You taught me what real strength looks like. Standing up in front of everyone who has power over you and choosing love over fear, choosing what's right over what's easy. That's courage. That's the kind of strength that actually matters. They dressed in silence, preparing for battle in business clothes and determined expressions. Cheryl borrowed one of Laurie's ties to pull her hair back into a severe bun, armor for the war ahead. As they left the hotel hand in hand, stepping out into the morning sunlight, Cheryl looked up at the bright sky and made herself a silent promise. She would not just survive the Capper family. She would thrive despite them. She would excel in ways that made their hatred look petty and small. She would teach them what it meant to underestimate someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Their love was the only blessing they needed. Everything else was just noise. 3 weeks later, Thessaly Capper cornered Cheryl in the executive washroom, appearing suddenly in the mirror behind her like a well-dressed ghost. The older woman's smile was all venom and ruby lipstick, her eyes glittering with malice. "Enjoy your desk while you can, sweetheart," Thessaly said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Dawson's patience has limits. And once he's done playing with his little social experiment, once he's proven to Laurie that you're nothing special, the fall will be spectacular. I cannot wait to watch." Cheryl met her eyes in the mirror, refusing to look away, refusing to be intimidated. She smiled back, matching Thessaly's cruelty with calm certainty. "I look forward to it." Chapter 2. The Exodus. She had 5 minutes to pack 3 years of brilliance into a cardboard box while the entire leadership team watched her humiliation like spectators at a gladiator match. The boardroom was designed to intimidate, every detail calculated to make visitors feel small and powerless. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city from the 37th floor, making anyone standing below the massive mahogany table feel like an ant against the backdrop of empire. The table itself could seat 30 people comfortably, and today every single seat was filled. Division heads, department directors, senior executives, all of them summoned without explanation to this emergency meeting, all of them whispering speculation about what could possibly require such urgent assembly. Cheryl sat in the middle of the left side, Laurie beside her, their hands clasped beneath the table where no one could see. She had learned to hide their connection during work hours, had learned all the unspoken rules of surviving in hostile territory. Dawson demanded absolute professionalism, which really meant pretending that Laurie and Cheryl were strangers who happened to work in the same building. "Keep your personal feelings outside these walls," he had told them both coldly during their first week. "In here you are employees, nothing more. I will not have my company turned into some romantic soap opera." For 3 years, Cheryl had complied. For 3 years, she had worked herself past exhaustion, arriving before dawn when the building was still dark and leaving well after midnight when even the cleaning crews had gone home. She had systematically fixed catastrophic mistakes in the supply operations that had been hemorrhaging money for years. She had designed entirely new systems that saved the company from what would have been inevitable collapse. She had restructured 3 failing divisions, turning them from liabilities into the company's most profitable units. She had done work that should have earned her promotions, recognition, respect. Instead, she had endured 3 years of Thessaly's constant mockery, whispered comments about diversity hires and affirmative action, 3 years of Dawson's cold dismissal, treating every success as expected and every minor mistake as proof of fundamental inadequacy. 3 years of executives who called her the diversity hire when they thought she couldn't hear, who questioned every decision she made while rubber-stamping identical decisions from men with half her qualifications. But she had survived it all because Laurie had been her refuge, her secret comfort. Every morning he found a way to bring her coffee, lingering just long enough to whisper encouragement. "You're brilliant. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Every evening he waited for her in the parking garage, driving her home, listening to her frustrations, reminding her why they endured this torture. "One day they'll see what I see. One day they'll understand." Cheryl had stopped believing that months ago. They would never see. They were too blinded by their own arrogance, their own hatred, their own fear of anyone who didn't look or sound or come from the same privileged places they did. They would never admit that a black woman from nothing had more talent and intelligence than their entire leadership team combined. Now, sitting in this boardroom with tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm, she felt the trap spring shut around her. She had known this day was coming, had felt it building for weeks in the way Dawson looked at her, in the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, in Thessaly's increasingly confident smirks. Dawson stood at the head of the table, his face impassive, carved from granite. He didn't look at her as he began speaking. This company was built on loyalty, on trust, on the understanding that we are family, and family takes care of its own. He paused, letting the words settle like stones. When those foundational principles are broken, when someone proves through their actions that they don't belong here, that they cannot be trusted, that they are actively working against the interests of this family, difficult decisions must be made. Cheryl's stomach dropped. Beside her, Laurie went rigid, his hand tightening around hers with painful intensity. "Effective immediately," Dawson said, finally turning his cold gaze directly on her, his eyes like chips of ice. "Your employment is terminated. You have 5 minutes to clear your personal items from your desk. Security has been notified and will escort you from the building. You are no longer welcome here." The room erupted. Voices rose in shock and protest from several quarters, executives who had worked with Cheryl and knew her value, who understood what her departure would mean. But Dawson raised one hand, and silence fell like a guillotine blade, absolute and final. Cheryl sat very still, her mind racing, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She felt Laurie start to stand, felt his hand tighten around hers, felt him preparing to explode in her defense. But she squeezed back gently, a silent communication they had perfected over years together. "Wait," the pressure said. "Trust me. Let me handle this my way." Slowly, carefully, she released his hand and stood, every eye in the room fixed on her like she was an animal in a zoo, something curious and slightly repulsive to be observed. She met Dawson's gaze directly, and for the first time in 3 years, she let him see exactly what she thought of him. Not with words, not with anger or tears or the breakdown he clearly expected, just with the slight curve of her lips, a smile. Calm, knowing, almost pitying. "Thank you," she said clearly, her voice steady and composed, each word perfectly enunciated. "For finally being honest about what this has always been." Then she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her head high, her steps measured and dignified. She didn't run. She didn't cry. She didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break, of proving that they had won, that they had hurt her. She walked like a queen leaving a room of peasants, like someone who knew her worth regardless of their judgment. Behind her, she heard the explosion of voices, heard Laurie's sharp, "Father, what the hell are you doing?" and heard Dawson's cold reply, cutting through the chaos, "Sit down, Laurie, now. This doesn't concern you." "Doesn't concern me? You just fired my wife." "I fired an employee who was not performing to standards. Now sit down before you embarrass yourself further." Cheryl walked to her office, a small space she had made her own, despite its size, filled with plants that had somehow survived her insane work hours and photographs of her and Laurie stolen in private moments. She pulled out the cardboard box she had secretly kept hidden under her desk for weeks. She had known this day was coming, had prepared for it, had made peace with it. She was sealing the box, her hands surprisingly steady, when she heard footsteps behind her. Multiple footsteps. Kempton Reeve, the chief operations officer, stood in her doorway. He was a quiet man in his 50s, thoughtful and careful, someone who had never mocked her but had never defended her either, someone who had taken the path of least resistance, keeping his head down and his opinions to himself. His face was pale now, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "This is wrong," he said quietly, but with absolute conviction. "Yes," Cheryl agreed, still packing. "It is. You saved this company multiple times. The operational restructuring alone saved us millions. The international expansion strategy was pure genius. Without you, we would have collapsed 2 years ago, and everyone in this building knows it." "I know." Cheryl sealed the box with tape, the sound sharp in the quiet office. Kempton stared at her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out on his face. Safety versus conscience, comfort versus integrity. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He walked to his own office next door and emerged carrying his briefcase, his laptop bag, his framed photos of his family. "What are you doing?" Cheryl asked, her calm finally cracking. "Something I should have done a long time ago." He loosened his tie with one hand, then called down the hall in a voice loud enough to carry through the entire floor. "Anyone who still has a conscience, anyone who still believes in doing what's right instead of what's easy, it's time to use it. Time to stand up." What happened next would become legendary in business circles, talked about in hushed tones for years to come, the day that Dawson Kappa's empire began its inevitable collapse. One by one, they came. Ramona from international markets, carrying her laptop and a box of personal items, her face set with determination. The entire innovation division, 6 people moving in a silent, grim-faced group, collecting their belongings with the efficiency of soldiers evacuating before a bombing. Derek, the lead systems architect, limping slightly from his bad knee, but moving faster than Cheryl had ever seen him move. The director of operations, the marketing director, the head of client relations, the senior strategy consultant. Thessaly appeared in the hallway like a fury, her face twisted with rage and something that might have been fear. "What do you think you're doing? Get back to your desks immediately." "This is insubordination. This is called having a spine," Kempton interrupted calmly. "You should try it sometime." No one listened to her. The exodus continued, people carrying boxes and bags, shutting down computers, collecting years of work and walking away from security and comfort because they had been shown, finally, that some things mattered more than paychecks. Because they had watched Cheryl work herself to exhaustion for 3 years, had watched her endure mockery and cruelty with grace and dignity, had watched her save the company while being treated like she was worthless, and they had had enough. 22 people walked out of that building behind Cheryl Luckett that day, following her into the unknown because she had treated them like human beings when everyone else had treated them like tools to be used and discarded. Because she had shown them that leadership meant lifting others up, not stepping on them to climb higher. On the street outside the towering office building, holding her box of 3 years compressed into cardboard, Cheryl finally allowed herself to feel the enormity of what had just happened. The adrenaline that had carried her through the firing, through the walk out, through the packing, suddenly drained away and left her trembling. Her eyes found Laurie, who had fought his way out of the boardroom, and now stood beside her, his own briefcase in hand, his tie torn from where his father had tried to physically restrain him from leaving. "We lost everything," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the last word. Laurie set down his briefcase with deliberate care. He took off his suit jacket, expensive, tailored, a symbol of the privilege he was walking away from, and wrapped it around her shoulders even though the autumn day was warm. The gesture wasn't about temperature. It was about protection, comfort, solidarity, claiming her as his even here, especially here, in front of the building where his family had tried to erase her. "No, my love," he said gently, pulling her close, wrapping his arms around her like he could shield her from the entire world. "We lost their cage, not us. We're free now. Finally, completely free." Cheryl looked at the 22 people gathered around them on the sidewalk, looking lost and uncertain and brave. She looked at Laurie, whose career she had just destroyed, whose family she had just cost him, whose entire future had just been upended. And she felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years working in that building. Hope, real, bright, impossible hope. "We start tomorrow," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. That night, they gathered in a basement space Laurie had rented with the last of their savings, a damp, cold concrete room that smelled like mildew and old pipes, but had 4 walls and a ceiling and was theirs. It was empty except for 24 people sitting on the concrete floor in a circle, like they were at some kind of bizarre spiritual retreat. Cheryl stood in the center and spoke from her heart. "I don't know what happens next. I don't have all the answers. I don't even know if we can make this work. But I know this: we are not victims. We are survivors. We are the people who stood up when staying seated would have been easier. And together, we're going to build something they can never take from us. Something real." Kempton spoke up from his spot on the floor. "What do we call ourselves? We need a name." Cheryl looked at Laurie, and he smiled at her with such love and pride that she felt her eyes sting with tears. "Call us what we are," he said softly. "A family." They fell asleep that night on the cold concrete floor. Cheryl's head on Laurie's chest, his arms wrapped around her. 22 others scattered around them in sleeping bags and blankets they had brought from home. It was the most uncomfortable and the most beautiful night of Cheryl's life, because they were free. Back in his office tower, Dawson Capper stood at the window, looking down at the 17 empty desks visible from his vantage point. Desks that represented his most talented employees, the institutional knowledge that had just walked out the door. And for the first time in his life, he felt the cold breath of consequence whisper across his neck. Chapter 3. Hunger and Fire. They learned that love tastes like instant noodles eaten at midnight on a floor with no furniture, and somehow it was the most delicious thing they had ever known. The first month was brutal. They had no clients, no contracts, no reputation outside of being the people who walked out on Dawson Capper. The 22 who had followed them were loyal beyond measure, but loyalty didn't pay rent or buy groceries or cover the mounting bills. Savings evaporated like water on hot concrete. The basement office that had seemed temporary became their entire world. Cheryl worked 20-hour days, making hundreds of calls, writing proposals until her fingers cramped. Most doors slammed in her face. Dawson's reach was long, his influence poisonous. Potential clients would listen politely, then cite vague concerns about reliability, coded language meaning Dawson had warned them away. Laurie worked beside her, never complaining, never suggesting they give up. He made calls to every contact, burned every bridge with his family's allies. Most refused. At night, they would collapse onto the air mattress in the corner, too tired to change clothes, holding each other in the darkness. Money became a constant anxiety. They rationed food, skipping meals to make supplies last longer. Cheryl learned to make one package of pasta feed 4 people. They stopped buying coffee, then tea, then drank only water. Small luxuries, soap that smelled nice, fresh fruit, clean sheets, became distant memories. On Cheryl's birthday, Laurie used their last few dollars to buy instant noodles and 1 candle. He cooked carefully, dividing the noodles into 2 bowls, and lit the candle after everyone had gone home. "Happy birthday, my love," he whispered. Cheryl looked at the flickering candle, the cheap noodles, the man she loved on a cold floor. Something inside her cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks, all the fear and exhaustion pouring out. "This is my birthday," she sobbed. "Noodles in a basement. No money, no future. I ruined your life. Stop." He gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "You saved me. Before you, I was sleepwalking through a life someone else designed. Now I'm alive. Now I'm fighting for something real. We're starving. We're surviving." He wiped her tears. "And when we rise, and we will rise, this will be our favorite memory. The 2 of us against the world, choosing each other when we had nothing else." She kissed him then, tasting salt and hope. They made love that night, their bodies speaking promises their situation seemed to mock. But the promises felt true anyway. 2 weeks later, Dawson made his move. A courier delivered a message summoning Laurie to the estate. Cheryl convinced him to go. "Face him," she said gently. "Then come home to me." The estate was imposing, cold. Dawson waited in his study, aged but still authoritative. "This foolishness has gone on long enough," Dawson said. "You've made your point. Now come home." "I am home." "You're living in a basement." Dawson's composure cracked. "Eating garbage, throwing away everything I've built for a woman who will never belong." "Careful, father. I'm offering you everything." Dawson spread his hands desperately. "Your position, board seat, vice presidency, doubled inheritance, the penthouse, everything. All you have to do is leave her." The words hung like poison gas. "You cannot be serious," Laurie said quietly. "Love fades," Dawson pleaded. "The chemical reaction burns out, but legacy endures. This empire is yours. Don't throw it away for passion that will leave you with nothing." Laurie saw clearly how small his father really was. How empty, how terrified of anything he couldn't control. "You don't understand," Laurie said softly. "Cheryl isn't taking me away from something valuable. She's the only valuable thing I've ever had. So you'll starve together? For what? For love, for integrity, for being able to look at myself in the mirror." Laurie moved toward the door. "Without her, I'm just another piece in your empire, wealthy, powerful, and completely alone." "What's wrong with that?" Laurie paused, looking back. "Everything, father. Everything is wrong with it when it costs you your humanity." He drove back in silence, hands shaking. When he walked in, Cheryl read everything in his face. "What did he offer you?" she asked. "Everything." Her breath caught. "What did you choose?" "You. I chose you. I will always choose you." She kissed him fiercely, relief and love pouring through her. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then be terrified together with me," he said, pulling her closer. "Be all of it with me, and we'll be enough." That night, they talked about their fears and dreams, about the possibility they might not make it. But they also talked about the alternative, comfort and misery, wealth and emptiness. "I'd rather have nothing with you," Cheryl said, "than everything without you." "Then we'll have nothing together," Laurie agreed. "And somehow we'll make it into something." The breakthrough came from Kempton's contacts. He found a regional manufacturer drowning in inefficiency on the brink of collapse. They had nothing to lose. Cheryl presented her proposal in a borrowed conference room, wearing the same suit from the day she was fired. She spoke for 90 minutes without notes, painting a vision so compelling that executives leaned forward, unable to look away. When she finished, silence stretched. This was their last chance. Then the CEO smiled. "When can you start?" The contract was signed 2 days later. When Cheryl saw the papers, she couldn't process it. Then she ran, across the office, straight into Laurie's arms. "We did it," she sobbed, laughing and crying. "They said yes. We have a client." Laurie lifted her off her feet, spinning her as the office erupted in cheers. He kissed her deeply, pouring years of struggle into that moment. "See," he whispered, "together we're unstoppable." The team celebrated with what little food they could afford. It wasn't fancy, but it was joyful. Cheryl gave a short speech. "We won because we gave a damn about the work, about each other, about doing things right instead of easy. This is just the beginning." That night, Cheryl and Laurie looked at the contract like it was sacred. "We're going to make it," she said. "We already made it." Laurie pulled her close. "The moment we chose each other, we won. This is just the world catching up." They went home and made love on their mattress on the floor, celebrating their survival, their refusal to break. Across the city, Dawson's CFO entered his office, face pale. "Sir, we've lost the Pemberton account. They've signed with her." Dawson's hand trembled, his empire cracking beneath him. Chapter 4. The Storm of Wolves. Dawson Kappa had built his empire on fear. He never imagined someone would build theirs on love, and that it would prove so much stronger. The attacks began subtly, with a phone call from a journalist that Cheryl almost didn't answer. The reporter's voice was friendly, casual, asking for a comment on a story she was writing about successful black women in business. It seemed innocent until the questions took a sharp turn into territory clearly designed to wound. "Is it true you were fired from your previous position for performance issues? Some sources say your husband's family believes you manipulated him into marriage. Care to comment? How do you respond to accusations that your new company is built on proprietary information you stole from your former employer?" Cheryl answered honestly, calmly, keeping her voice professional even as rage boiled beneath her skin. She explained that she was let go for refusing to compromise her integrity, that her husband's family's opinion was their own business, that every system and process in her company was built from scratch with innovations that went far beyond anything her former employer had even imagined. Then she watched the article come out and felt sick. "Unqualified woman sleeps her way into husband's business," the headline screamed across the top of a major business publication's website. The story painted her as a manipulator, a seductress who had trapped a naive, rich man and was now riding his connections while providing nothing of substance. Laurie was portrayed as a fool, blinded by lust, throwing away his birthright for temporary pleasures. Their company was described as built on stolen ideas and marital deception, doomed to fail once the truth came out. More articles followed in a coordinated wave. Anonymous sources, clearly people who had never even spoken to Cheryl, gave interviews describing her as difficult, unprofessional, incompetent, vindictive. Former colleagues whose names she didn't even recognize claimed she had been a nightmare to work with, that everyone at the old company was relieved when she left. Her face appeared in business publications alongside words like controversial and questionable and problematic, each article citing the others in a self-referential loop of manufactured scandal. The campaign was coordinated, vicious, clearly funded by someone with deep pockets and deeper grudges, someone who knew exactly how to weaponize media to destroy reputations. "It's my father," Laurie said grimly one evening, reading the latest hit piece on his laptop. "This has his fingerprints all over it. These aren't organic stories. Someone is paying these journalists, feeding them information, probably offering them access to sources they want in exchange for running these pieces." Cheryl sat at their desk in the basement office, staring at the screen, showing comment after comment, calling her terrible names, questioning her worth, her integrity, her very humanity. People she had never met were declaring with absolute certainty that she was a gold digger, a fraud, a diversity hire who had fooled everyone into thinking she had talent. The words blurred together into a chorus of hatred that made her stomach turn and her hands shake. "Maybe we should respond," Kempton suggested carefully from where he sat nearby, his face troubled. "Set the record straight. Tell our side of the story." "No." Cheryl closed her laptop with more force than necessary. "If we fight in the mud with pigs, all that happens is we get dirty and the pigs enjoy themselves. We stay focused on the work. We do the work. We let our results speak louder than their lies." But the attacks worked in ways that went beyond hurt feelings. 3 potential clients called within the same week to cancel scheduled meetings, citing concerns about controversy and recent developments. Existing relationships with suppliers became strained. People suddenly reluctant to be associated with a company surrounded by scandal. The manufacturer who had signed with them started asking uncomfortable questions about the security of their proprietary information. Laurie watched his wife absorb blow after blow, maintaining her professional composure during work hours, but crying herself to sleep at night. Her body shaking with silent sobs, she tried to hide even from him. He watched her get up every morning despite the pain, put on her armor of professional clothes and confident smiles, and face another day of character assassination. And something inside him snapped. He booked himself on a live national business program without telling anyone, calling in favors from college contacts who remembered him before his father's poison spread through their social circles. The host, a woman known for asking brutal questions and destroying unprepared guests, agreed immediately when she heard about the Kappa family drama. Cheryl only learned about it when Laurie texted her at noon. "Turn on Channel 7, right now." Trust me, she and the entire team gathered around someone's laptop, streaming the show, and Cheryl felt her heart climb into her throat as she saw Laurie sitting across from the famously ruthless interviewer. "Mr. Capper," the host began without preamble, her voice sharp, "there are serious questions being raised about your wife's qualifications and your new company's legitimacy. Allegations of theft, manipulation, fraud. What do you say to critics who claim this is all smoke and mirrors built on stolen information and marital deception?" Laurie looked directly into the camera, and when he spoke, his voice was clear and unwavering, filled with quiet conviction. "I say that critics who can't compete on merit will always resort to attacking character. It's the last refuge of mediocrity. My wife is the most brilliant strategist I have ever known, and I've worked with some of the most educated and experienced people in this industry. She doesn't just solve problems. She sees solutions that no one else even imagines. She has transformed failing systems into thriving ones. She has outworked, outthought, and out-innovated everyone who has tried to compete with her. That's why they're afraid. But the allegations of stolen proprietary are lies." Laurie's interruption was polite but firm, his jaw set. "Complete fabrications spread by people who are terrified of what she represents. Someone who doesn't need their approval to succeed. Someone who can build something real with integrity instead of fear. Every single system, every process, every innovation in our company was built from scratch. We have documentation, timestamps, witnesses, but more importantly, our work speaks for itself." The host leaned forward, sensing blood in the water. "Your father has publicly stated that you're making a terrible mistake, that you've chosen your wife over your family legacy, that love has blinded you to reality. What do you say to that?" Laurie smiled then, and it was the saddest, most beautiful smile Cheryl had ever seen. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but his voice remained steady. "I say that if loving her is weakness, then I never want to be strong. If choosing integrity over comfort is a mistake, then I hope I make that mistake every day for the rest of my life. My father built an empire on fear and control. My wife is building one on respect and trust. History will judge which foundation lasts longer. You've given up enormous wealth, power, connections. I've given up nothing that mattered." Laurie looked straight into the camera again, and Cheryl knew he was speaking directly to her. "My wife is my family. Everything else is just noise. And I would choose her every single day, in every single circumstance, over every alternative. Because she makes me better. She makes me real. She makes me human." The clip went viral within hours. It had been viewed millions of times before the show even finished airing, shared across every platform, quoted in articles and posts and discussions. The interview became a symbol: love against cynicism, courage against fear, integrity against corruption. People who had never heard of Cheryl or Laurie found themselves crying over the raw honesty, the absolute conviction in his voice when he defended his wife. Messages poured in, some supportive, sharing their own stories of choosing love over family approval, of standing up to powerful people who tried to control them. Some hateful, calling Laurie weak and whipped and foolish, calling Cheryl every racist and sexist slur imaginable. But all of them making Cheryl and Laurie's story impossible to ignore, forcing their love into the public consciousness as something that couldn't be dismissed or ignored. They became legendary, the gay couple who walked away from everything to build something. True, but victory came at a cost. 2 days after the interview, 3 more clients withdrew, explicitly citing the controversy and their discomfort with being associated with a company that was so divisive. The attacks in the media intensified rather than fading. Dawson gave his own interview, cold and dismissive in that infuriating way he had perfected. "My son is confused. Love has blinded him to reality. When this fantasy crumbles, and it will because fantasies always do, I hope he has the wisdom to return home before it's too late." That night, Cheryl broke in a way she hadn't let herself break before. Laurie found her sitting on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by printed articles and screenshots of hate messages people had sent to their company email. She was crying silently, her shoulders shaking, her hands trembling as she held piece after piece of evidence that the world hated her. "I'm destroying you," she whispered when she saw him, her voice raw and broken. "Everything you touch turns to poison because of me. Your father was right. I'm dragging you down. You should leave me before I ruin what's left of your life." "No." Laurie dropped to his knees beside her, gathering up the papers and throwing them aside, pulling her into his arms with almost desperate intensity. "No, everything I touch turns real because of you. Before you I was a ghost, a shadow of what my father wanted me to be, playing a role in a play I never auditioned for. Now I'm alive. Now I'm fighting for something that matters. Now I know what it means to be truly, completely myself. We're losing, Laurie. They're winning. We're fighting. There's a difference. Fighting means we haven't given up. Fighting means we still believe." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him, to see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Listen to me. Every fall we lift each other back up. Every doubt we answer together. Every attack we survive together. We're not fragile, we're a force. This storm will pass because we're stronger than it is. How can you possibly know that? Because we have something they don't understand and can never touch, no matter how many lies they spread or how much money they spend trying to destroy us. We have each other, real, true, unshakable. That makes us invincible. Not because we can't be hurt, but because we can survive anything as long as we're together." She kissed him desperately, needing his certainty like oxygen, needing his strength to replenish her own. They made love on the apartment floor, urgent and fierce, reminding each other physically what words couldn't fully express. We are still here. We are still together. We are still fighting. We will not break. The next morning they returned to the basement office with renewed determination. The 22 colleagues saw their leader's unshakable bond and worked with double devotion, inspired by love that could survive this kind of sustained assault and emerge not weaker but stronger. Slowly, Painfully, they began to win small victories despite the attacks. A client who believed in them despite the articles, who did their own research and saw the truth beneath the lies. A contract that came through from someone who didn't care about Dawson Kappa's opinion. Positive results from their first client that spoke louder than any accusation. Systems working better, efficiency improving, profits increasing in measurable, undeniable ways. They were surviving. And in surviving, they were proving that love was not a weakness, but the strongest weapon they had. Thessaly walked into Dawson's office without knocking 3 months after the exodus, carrying a folder with trembling hands. Her face was pale, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear. "Father, you need to see their third quarter results." She placed the folder on his desk like it might explode. "They're not just surviving, they're growing fast." Chapter 5. The Foundation of Loyalty. Empires built on fear crumble when fear fades. Empires built on loyalty stand forever. The 22 colleagues who had followed Cheryl out of Dawson's building didn't just work for her, they believed in her with the kind of fervor usually reserved for prophets. She had proven day after day that she saw them as human beings, with lives and families and dreams, rather than instruments to be used and discarded. When Derek came to Cheryl's desk with red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, she knew something terrible had happened. "My daughter needs surgery, heart valve replacement. Insurance won't cover it all. I need $15,000 by next week." His voice broke. I didn't know who else to ask. Cheryl didn't hesitate. "How much do you actually need? Not minimum. How much for the best care and no debt after?" He stared at her. $25,000 would cover everything. Cheryl wrote the check for $30,000. "The extra is for you and your wife to take time off. Family comes first, always." Derek broke down, and Cheryl held him while Laurie watched and fell in love with his wife all over again. This was who she was, someone who would give everything to protect the people she cared about. When Ramona's mother passed suddenly, Cheryl and Laurie didn't just send flowers. They attended the funeral 2 hours away, stayed for the entire service, and helped clean up afterward. "You didn't have to come," Ramona said through tears. "You have so much else to worry about." "Yes, we did," Cheryl replied. "We're family. That's what family does." These moments built loyalty deeper than paychecks. The team worked insane hours because they believed in what they were building, in the idea that a company could be both profitable and humane. Still, life was hard. Cheryl and Laurie's apartment was barely furnished. They slept on a mattress on the floor because every spare dollar went to the company, to their people. Cardboard boxes served as tables. Their clothes were years old, worn thin. One evening, Cheryl laughed suddenly, surprising Laurie. "Look at us," she said. "We're making decent money now, and we still have nothing. We have each other." "I know. That's what's funny. We're richer than them. We have peace. Your father has mansions and he's miserable. We have nothing and we're happy." Laurie kissed her head. "I would choose this apartment over his mansion every single day." They made love slowly that night, savoring every touch. Afterward, wrapped in threadbare sheets, Cheryl felt complete contentment, not happiness from having everything, but peace from having exactly what mattered. The breakthrough came from Cheryl's months of work on a revolutionary approach to operations management. Through Kempton's connections, she found herself presenting to a massive national corporation. They were skeptical, traditional, and had heard the ugly rumors. But they were desperate. She presented for 3 hours, speaking with passion about transforming entire systems. She showed models, projections, case studies from their first client whose metrics had improved beyond expectations. When she finished, the boardroom was silent for so long her heart began to sink. Then the CEO leaned forward with a genuine smile. "This is the most brilliant thing I've heard in 30 years in this industry. When can you start?" The contract was worth more than Dawson's entire company made in a year. When Cheryl saw the signed papers, she couldn't process it. Then she ran across the office straight into Laurie's arms. "We did it," she sobbed. "The contract they signed. It's huge." Laurie lifted her off the ground, spinning her as the office erupted. He kissed her deeply. Years of struggle poured into that moment. "Your brilliance," he whispered, "is my favorite thing in the entire world." The team celebrated with real food, good food. Cheryl gave a speech. "We won because we refused to compromise. We treated people like family. We chose truth over convenience. We built loyalty instead of fear." That night, looking at the contract, Cheryl said, "We're really going to make it." "We already made it." Laurie pulled her close. "The moment we chose each other, we won. This is just the world catching up." They made love, celebrating their survival, their refusal to break. As they fell asleep, Cheryl felt hope blooming. Everything they had sacrificed was paying off in ways more beautiful than she had dared to dream. Across the city, Dawson's CFO entered, face pale. "Sir, we've lost the Pemberton account. 15 years, 20% of our revenue they've signed with her." Dawson's hand trembled as he reached for his scotch, his empire cracking like thin ice over deep water. Chapter 6. The Cracks. In the dynasty, karma doesn't shout, it whispers, and then it takes everything. The first crack in Dawson Kappa's empire appeared so subtly that he almost missed it, dismissed it as an anomaly rather than a harbinger of collapse. A longtime client, someone whose family had done business with the Kappas for 3 generations, called to say they were exploring other options. When Dawson pressed, when he reminded them of decades of partnership and mutual benefit, they cited vague concerns about future direction and innovative approaches that his company apparently lacked. Innovative approaches, fresh perspectives. The words tasted like ash in Dawson's mouth because he knew exactly where those phrases had come from, whose influence was spreading through his industry like a disease. Within months, more cracks appeared with increasing frequency. Another major client left, then another, citing the same infuriating language about innovation and fresh thinking. Investment opportunities that had seemed certain, that he had been assured were locked in, suddenly fell through. Partners who had been reliable for years started questioning his decisions, his strategy, his leadership. The stock price began. A slow, steady decline that turned into a concerning slide. Board members who had been docile rubber stamps started asking uncomfortable questions at meetings, demanding explanations for declining revenue and market share. The empire that had seemed invincible just a year ago started showing its age, its weaknesses, the rot that had been hidden beneath shiny surfaces and intimidating facades. Meanwhile, across the city, Cheryl's company was thriving in ways that seemed almost impossible. The large national contract had opened floodgates. Other companies came calling, wanting to know about this innovative approach everyone was talking about, this woman who had transformed struggling operations into thriving enterprises. Her name appeared in business publications. Positive articles now, profiles of her revolutionary methods, interviews where journalists hung on her every word. She declined most of them, staying focused on the work rather than the attention. But her influence spread anyway through word of mouth and results that spoke louder than any marketing campaign. Media outlets that had mocked her months ago now requested interviews, trying to pivot from their earlier hit pieces without acknowledging their complicity in the smear campaign. Cheryl turned them all down with polite firmness, refusing to give them redemption or another chance to twist her words. Dawson noticed everything. He read every article, watched every mention, searched for her name obsessively like picking at a wound that wouldn't heal. He saw his son's face in photographs beside his wife, both of them looking genuinely happy. In a way Dawson had never seen Laurie look during all his years living under his father's roof. The happiness in those photos made something twist in Dawson's chest, though he would never have named it as regret or shame. One evening, Cheryl and Laurie sat in their apartment, still modestly furnished but slowly improving, actual chairs now instead of boxes, reading the news on their tablets. "Your father's company is having serious problems," Cheryl said quietly, reading an article about layoffs and restructuring. "I know." Laurie's voice was carefully neutral. "Does that make you feel—" She searched for the word, wanting to be honest, but not wanting to assume vindicated. Happy? Satisfied? Laurie set down his tablet and looked at her with such seriousness that she knew he had been thinking about this question for a while. "No, it makes me sad. He built something real once, before fear turned him into what he became, before controlling everything became more important than building something worth having. Now he's watching it crumble, because he never understood that you can't sustain an empire on fear alone. Fear works until people stop being afraid." Cheryl moved closer to him, taking his hand in both of hers. "We won with love, not hate. That matters to me. It would have been so easy to want revenge, to enjoy his suffering, to gloat. But it doesn't feel good. It just feels sad." "Yes." He kissed her forehead, pulling her against his side where she fit perfectly. "That's what makes you better than him. Better than all of them. You understand that destroying your enemies makes you more like them, but building something beautiful makes you yourself." The knock on their apartment door that evening was so unexpected that they both froze, looking at each other with matching expressions of confusion and concern. No one ever visited unannounced. Laurie opened the door cautiously and found his mother, Hollis Capper, standing in the hallway. She had aged terribly in the year since they had last seen her. Her face was drawn, her expensive clothes hanging loosely on a frame that had lost too much weight too quickly. Her eyes were red from what looked like weeks or months of crying. She looked at her son with desperate hope mixed with shame. "May I come in?" she asked quietly, her voice cracking. Laurie looked back at Cheryl, who nodded slowly despite the tightness in her chest. He stepped aside, letting his mother enter their modest home. Hollis looked around at the simple furniture, the small space that was probably smaller than her walk-in closet, and something in her face crumbled like old paper. "You're living like this," she whispered, seeming genuinely shocked. "I didn't know. I didn't realize. What do you want, Mother?" Laurie asked, not unkindly but not warmly either. Hollis turned to Cheryl, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, cutting through carefully applied makeup. "Please," she said, her voice breaking completely. "Please help us. The family is falling apart. Your father-in-law won't admit it, he's too proud. But we're in serious trouble. Clients are leaving in droves. The money is disappearing faster than we can track. The lawyers say we might lose everything, the house, the company, all of it. Please, I'm begging you." Cheryl stood very still, looking at this woman who had sat silent at her wedding while Dawson destroyed her, who had watched her son choose between his family and his wife and said nothing, did nothing, chose comfort over courage every single time, who had never once called during their months of poverty to check on them, to offer help, to even acknowledge their existence. "Where were you?" Cheryl asked quietly, each word precisely placed like stones in a wall. "When I was abandoned. Where were you when your husband humiliated me in front of everyone who mattered? Where were you when we were sleeping on floors and eating one meal a day? Where were you when your son needed his mother?" "I was afraid," Hollis sobbed, her whole body shaking. "I was a coward. I know that. I've always known it. But please, I'm begging you. We're family." "No." Cheryl's voice was gentle but absolutely firm, unmovable as stone. "You are his family. We are ours. You cannot buy loyalty with regret. You cannot undo years of silence with sudden tears. You chose your side when it mattered, when standing up would have cost you something. Now you have to live with that choice." Hollis turned to Laurie, reaching for him with trembling hands. Son, please. I know I failed you. I know I should have stood up for you, for your wife. But I'm your mother. Don't! Laurie stepped back, his hand finding Cheryl's, their fingers lacing together with practiced ease. She's right. You chose father over us. You chose comfort over integrity. You chose silence when speaking up would have mattered. I'm sorry you're suffering. I genuinely am. But we cannot save you from consequences you helped create. Hollis left crying, her sobs echoing in the hallway long after the door closed. After she was gone, Cheryl and Laurie held each other in heavy silence. It wasn't a moment of triumph or vindication. It was sad and necessary and painful in the way that setting boundaries always is when love and hurt get tangled together. "Did we do the right thing?" Cheryl asked quietly. "Yes," Laurie said with absolute conviction. "Helping them wouldn't heal them or teach them anything. It would just delay the lesson they desperately need to learn, that fear and cruelty eventually consume everything they touch." 2 weeks later, new attacks came from a different direction. Competitors, seeing Cheryl's rapid success and recognizing the threat she represented, began their own coordinated campaign. But these were more sophisticated than Dawson's crude smears. Whispers spread through industry circles about an inappropriate relationship between Cheryl and Kempton. Accusations of financial impropriety, of cooking books to make their results look better than they actually were. Lies designed not just to hurt Cheryl, but to splinter the partnership, to drive a wedge between her and Laurie with the oldest weapon in the playbook, sexual jealousy. The tabloids picked up the stories with gleeful malice. Photographs of Cheryl and Kempton leaving a perfectly innocent business dinner were cropped and angled to suggest intimacy. Captions dripped with insinuation and poison. The stories were absurd to anyone who actually knew them, easily disproven with basic fact-checking, but they spread like wildfire anyway, because scandal is more interesting than truth. Laurie found Cheryl reading the latest article in their office late one night, long after everyone else had gone home. Her face was pale, her hands shaking, her eyes red from crying. "They won't stop," she said hoarsely, her voice scraped raw. "No matter what we achieve, no matter how successful we become, they'll always find new ways to try to destroy us, new lies to spread, new weapons to use." Laurie took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him, to see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "They can't destroy what they never built. Our marriage, our partnership, our love, they had no part in creating any of it. So they have no power to end it, none." "How can you be so sure? How can you have so much faith after everything?" "Because I know you. I know the woman who held me when I walked away from everything I'd ever known. I know the woman who works 20-hour days to take care of our people. I know the woman who would rather sleep on floors with me than in mansions without me." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I know us. I know that what we have is real in a way these people will never understand. They think love is fragile, easily broken by gossip and manufactured scandal. They don't realize it's the strongest thing in the world when it's actually real. I'm so tired of fighting." "Then rest. Lean on me. Let me carry us for a while." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We take turns being strong. That's what partnerships mean." They made love that night, slowly, tenderly, in their office on the couch they had finally been able to afford. They reminded each other with their bodies what tabloids could never touch, what lies could never diminish. The absolute truth of their connection, the unshakable foundation they had built together through fire and flood. The next morning, they released a single statement through their lawyer. Simple and clear. "Our marriage is built on trust that was earned through years of choosing each other, when choosing each other was the hardest thing in the world. Lies are just noise." They said nothing else, gave no interviews, provided no additional comments. They let their relationship speak for itself through their actions. The way Laurie still brought Cheryl coffee every morning. The way she still touched his hand when they passed in the office. The way they looked at each other in meetings like no one else existed, like they were sharing a private joke that the rest of the world would never understand. The attacks faded because there was nothing to sustain them. Truth is boring. Love that simply endures, that refuses to engage with drama, doesn't make good headlines. Eventually, even the tabloids moved on to easier targets, people who would fight back and create the conflict that sells papers. Cheryl and Laurie endured. They always endured. That was their superpower. The ability to keep choosing each other, keep building together, keep loving each other through everything the world threw at them. An embossed invitation arrived one morning, delivered by courier in a heavy envelope. Cheryl was invited to speak at the Global Economic Forum, the most prestigious gathering in the business world. The same stage Dawson had dominated for 2 decades. The same platform he had used to lecture others about leadership and success while his own empire rotted from within. Cheryl held the invitation in trembling hands and looked at Laurie. "This is real. This is actually happening. You deserve it," he said simply. "The world is finally catching up." Chapter 7. The Rise of the Phoenix. She stood before thousands, a woman who'd been given 5 minutes to clear her desk, and now the world waited on her every word. The Global Economic Forum was held in a massive convention center that seemed designed to make even confident people feel small, all glass and steel and modern architecture that reached toward the sky, like a cathedral to capitalism. Thousands of executives, thought leaders, innovators, and journalists gathered from around the world, the most powerful people in business, all converging on this single place. The main auditorium could seat 10,000 people, and every single seat was filled, with hundreds more standing in the back and lining the walls. Cheryl stood backstage in a simple but elegant suit, not designer, not expensive, but perfectly tailored and professional. She had bought it herself with her own money, and that fact mattered more than any label ever could. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for her introduction. The speech she had prepared was memorized, but her mind kept going blank with fear, words disappearing like water through her fingers. Laurie stood beside her, as he always did, his hand warm and steady on the small of her back. "You're going to be magnificent," he whispered, his voice cutting through the panic. "What if I forget everything? What if I freeze up there? What if, then you take a breath, remember who you are, and speak from your heart?" These people didn't come to hear a perfect performance. They came to hear the truth. That's all you need to give them. The announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing through the massive space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cheryl Luckett, founder and CEO of Luckett Kappa Innovations." The applause was polite, professional, but Cheryl could hear the undercurrent of skepticism. They had come to see if she was real or just another flash in the pan, another person who got lucky once and would fade back into obscurity. She kissed Laurie once, quickly, drawing strength from his lips. Then she walked onto the stage. The lights were blinding. The sea of faces was overwhelming. For one terrible moment, Cheryl couldn't remember why she was here or what she was supposed to say. Then she found Laurie in the front row, sitting exactly where he had promised to be, his eyes full of pride and love. She took a breath and began. "5 years ago, I was given 5 minutes to clear my desk." Her voice rang clear through the auditorium, steady despite her pounding heart. "My father-in-law, the CEO of the company where I worked, fired me in front of the entire leadership team. It was designed to humiliate me, to break me, to prove that I didn't belong in his world, in any world that mattered." The audience was completely silent. 10,000 people holding their collective breath. He was right. I didn't belong in his world, because his world was built on fear, on making people small so he could feel large, on crushing anyone who dared to be different, to think differently, to challenge the status quo that protected his power. She paused, letting her eyes sweep the crowd, seeing faces she recognized from business publications, leaders of Fortune 500 companies, people whose wealth could buy nations. I didn't break that day. I smiled, I said thank you, and I walked out with my head high. 22 colleagues followed me out of that building, giving up security and comfort and everything safe because they believed in something more important than paychecks. They believed in being treated with dignity, in being seen as human beings rather than instruments to be used until they broke. Cheryl's voice grew stronger with each word, fear transforming into conviction. They tried to bury me after that. They tried to bury all of us. They spread lies, launched smear campaigns, used every ounce of power and influence and money to destroy what we were building. They made calls to every potential client, warning them away. They planted stories in media outlets questioning my competence, my integrity, my very humanity. They weaponized racism and sexism and every tool of oppression they could find. The audience stirred, uncomfortable perhaps, but unable to look away. They forgot something crucial. She smiled then, and it was fierce and knowing. Seeds grow strongest in darkness. Pressure creates diamonds. And love, real, true, unshakable love, is the most powerful force in the universe. The audience erupted in spontaneous applause, but Cheryl held up her hand, asking for silence. She had more to say. I'm not here to talk about revenge or vindication. I'm here to talk about a different kind of power. The power that comes from lifting others up instead of tearing them down. The power of building something real instead of projecting an illusion of success while everything rots beneath the surface. The power of choosing integrity when cruelty would be easier, when cruelty would be more profitable, when cruelty is what everyone expects. She looked directly at Laurie again, and her voice softened with emotion. My husband taught me something beautiful. He showed me that when you strip everything away, the money, the connections, the safety net of privilege, and you have nothing left but each other, you discover you have everything that actually matters. We ate instant noodles on concrete floors and called it a feast. We slept on air mattresses in a freezing basement and called it home. We had nothing by any measurable standard, and we had everything that can't be measured, all at the same time. There were tears now in eyes throughout the massive auditorium, powerful people crying openly at the simple truth she was speaking. Now we've built something extraordinary, not because we're smarter or better than anyone else, not because we had advantages or connections or special access. We built it because we refused to compromise on what mattered. We treated people like family instead of resources. We chose truth over convenience every single time. We built loyalty instead of fear. We created a foundation of respect and trust and genuine care for each other. And that foundation proved stronger than any empire built on cruelty could ever be. The standing ovation started before she finished her last sentence. It rolled through the auditorium like thunder, 10,000 people on their feet, applauding until their hands must have ached, some crying, all of them moved by the raw honesty she had offered them. The ovation lasted 7 full minutes. 7 minutes of sustained applause that made Cheryl's chest tight with emotion she couldn't name. She stood on that stage feeling more exposed and more powerful than she had ever felt in her life. Backstage, Laurie caught her in his arms the moment she was out of sight, lifting her completely off her feet. You were incredible, perfect, more than I even dreamed you would be. I was terrified every single second. You were magnificent. He set her down just enough to kiss her deeply, pouring years of pride and love into that kiss, not caring about the cameras or the press or the world watching. I am so profoundly proud to be your husband. Within hours, the speech went viral in ways that transcended normal business news. Clips appeared everywhere, shared millions of times across every platform, quoted in articles and posts and discussions that reached far beyond their industry. The full video was watched tens of millions of times. Her words about seeds growing in darkness became a meme, a rallying cry, a symbol of hope for anyone facing their own giants. But more importantly, they received messages, thousands upon thousands of them, from people trapped in toxic workplaces finding courage to leave, from people facing their own powerful opponents and needing to know that resistance was possible, from people who had lost hope that goodness could win in the real world and desperately needed proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually triumph. Cheryl sat in their apartment that evening, now actually comfortable, with real furniture and art on the walls, reading message after message and crying. "We're giving people hope," she said to Laurie, her voice thick with emotion. "No, my love." He pulled her close, holding her against his chest. "You're giving them proof. Proof that the good guys can win, that love can conquer fear when you refuse to give up, that choosing right over easy actually matters in the real world. That integrity and kindness aren't weaknesses, but the strongest weapons we have." The company's value tripled overnight as clients clamored to work with the woman who had spoken such powerful truth on the world's biggest stage. But the numbers, as satisfying as they were, mattered less than the shift in narrative. Cheryl was no longer the woman who had been fired, or the controversial figure, or the diversity hire. She was a visionary, a leader, a symbol of what was possible when you refused to let the world make you small. Across the city, Dawson watched the speech on his computer, his hands trembling as they hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to reach out to say something, but what would he even say? The words she had spoken were gentle but devastating, exposing everything he had built as hollow and afraid and fundamentally weak. His empire was crumbling while hers soared. The irony was almost poetic, almost beautiful in its brutal symmetry. The mansion he had been so proud of went on the market at a price that was embarrassingly low compared to what he had paid. His brothers' homes were foreclosed on, the whole family's wealth evaporating like morning mist under harsh sunlight. Power and prestige vanished, revealing the emptiness that had always existed beneath the expensive surfaces. Meanwhile, Cheryl and Laurie's company became an industry titan, built on the radical foundation of actually caring about people. They helped every one of their original 22 colleagues buy homes, start college funds for their children, share meaningfully in the company's success. They created a model that other companies began trying to replicate, though most failed because they didn't understand that you can't fake genuine care. You either value people or you don't. There's no middle ground. Thessaly stood in the empty boardroom of what was left of Kappa Industries, looking at the photograph of Dawson from his glory days, and realized with absolute clarity that the empire was over. Everything they had built, everything they had taken pride in, had been built on sand, and the tide had finally come in. Chapter 8. The Pilgrimage of the Broken. They came one by one. The family that had once stood united in cruelty, now shattered into pieces begging for mercy. Dawson's family began their humiliating pilgrimage in autumn. First came Thessaly, the woman who had mocked Cheryl mercilessly, who had cornered her in bathrooms to whisper poison. She appeared at the Luckett Kappa offices, looking diminished, expensive clothes now worn, hair showing grey roots, face marked by new lines of worry. The receptionist called nervously. "There's a Thessaly Kappa here to see you." "No appointment." Cheryl closed her eyes briefly. "Send her up." Thessaly entered Cheryl's corner office and stopped just inside the door, hands twisting nervously, all former confidence stripped away. "Thank you for seeing me," she said quietly. Cheryl gestured to a chair but remained standing, Laurie beside her. "What do you want, Thessaly?" "I need work, any work. I heard you were hiring and I thought..." "You thought what?" Cheryl's voice was calm but immovable. "That I would forget every cruel word, every mocking laugh, every time you tried to make me feel less than human." Thessaly's face crumbled. "I was wrong. I was jealous and small. Please, I have nothing left. My savings are gone. I can't find work anywhere. I just need a chance." Cheryl felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a quiet boundary. "No," she said simply. "Please, you had chances, Thessaly. To be kind when I was vulnerable. To stand up when your nephew was choosing between family and wife. To be human. You chose cruelty. Now you live with that choice. Thessaly left sobbing, and Cheryl watched with something like pity, but mostly exhaustion. They came in a steady stream after that. Dawson's brothers, faces haggard, asking for jobs or loans. Cousins who had laughed at her wedding now begged for connections. Each one, Cheryl received politely, listened in silence, and turned away with the same quiet word: no. Laurie watched his wife navigate this parade with steady grace. Never cruel, never gloating, just firm. She had drawn a line around what she built, and she would not let them contaminate it with their desperation. "Does it feel good?" he asked one evening. "Turning them away?" Cheryl considered seriously. "No, it feels necessary. They're not asking for forgiveness. They're asking for rescue from consequences. If they were here to genuinely apologize, maybe I'd feel differently. But they just want me to fix what their cruelty broke. I can't do that." "I love you," Laurie said suddenly. She smiled. "I know. That's the only reason I survived long enough to be standing here." Then came the audacious offer. Dawson's lawyers arrived with contracts offering Cheryl complete control of what remained of Kappa Industries. Full ownership. The family would step aside entirely. Cheryl read carefully. It was legitimate, properly drafted. They were offering her the kingdom, admitting defeat in the most formal way possible. She set down the papers. "Tell Dawson my answer is no. Miss Luckett, this is incredibly generous. I don't fix ruins," she interrupted gently. "I build futures. His company is finished because it was built on fear. That foundation has cracked beyond repair. Taking control would be like putting makeup on a corpse. It's still dead." The lawyers left baffled. Laurie squeezed her hand, the only approval that mattered. Media covered every rejection. Public opinion split sharply. Some called Cheryl vindictive. Others called her a symbol of strength, a woman who had earned the right to protect what she built. Cheryl read none of it. Other people's opinions were noise. The only opinions that mattered belonged to people she loved and respected. One evening, on their penthouse balcony watching sunset paint the city gold, Laurie asked quietly, "Do you ever regret it? Any of it? The struggle, the pain?" Cheryl cupped his face. "Every moment of pain led me here. To you, to us, to this life we built together. How could I regret the path that brought me to the only thing that has ever truly mattered?" She kissed him as the sun disappeared, and they stood in gathering darkness. Two people who had chosen each other when they had nothing else, and who would make that choice again every day. Their love had survived everything. It would survive anything. Dawson's assistant placed a message on his desk the next morning, voice gentle with pity. "Mr. Kappa, your son and daughter-in-law are visiting the estate tomorrow. They've requested you be present." Chapter 9, The Gathering Storm. The house that had once symbolized power now stood hollow, its halls echoing with the ghosts of arrogance past. Cheryl and Laurie drove through the gates of the Kappa estate in silence, the iron bars opening with a groan that sounded almost mournful. The grounds were still maintained, but with visible neglect, hedges growing wild in places, leaves floating in the fountain that used to run crystal clear, paint peeling near the guest house that had once hosted foreign dignitaries and business titans. Even the landscaping reflected what was happening inside, an empire in its death throes, trying to maintain appearances while everything crumbled beneath. Behind them, in two separate vehicles, came 12 of their most senior colleagues, witnesses. Cheryl had insisted on bringing them, needing people who understood the full journey, who had walked this entire impossible path from basement floors where they slept without pillows to boardrooms where they commanded respect and power. People who knew what this moment meant, what it had cost to arrive here. The estate loomed before them, massive and cold, and somehow smaller than Cheryl remembered. Funny how places that once seemed overwhelming could shrink once you stopped being afraid of them. Once you realized that buildings were just buildings, that power was just an illusion that only worked if you believed in it. Dawson waited in what had once been his grand office, the room where he had ruled his empire with absolute authority. But now the space felt hollow. Furniture had been sold to pay debts. The antique desk where he had signed billion-dollar deals was gone, replaced by something cheaper from a furniture store. The Persian rugs had been auctioned off. The walls showed rectangular shadows where priceless art had once hung. Only a few pieces remained, not enough to fill the vast space, making the emptiness feel intentional, like a monument to failure. Hollis stood beside her husband, looking frail and frightened, her hands trembling as she clutched a tissue. Thessaly lurked in the shadows near the window, her face a mask of shame and desperate hope. The remaining family members gathered like mourners at a funeral, because that's exactly what this was, the funeral of everything they had thought they were, everything they had believed made them special. When Cheryl walked in, Laurie at her side, and their 12 colleagues forming a quiet wall of support behind them. Dawson's breath caught audibly in his throat. She looked so different from the frightened young woman who had walked down the aisle years ago, the woman he had tried so hard to break and destroy. Now she moved with absolute certainty, quiet power radiating from her like heat from a flame. She had survived every test and emerged not just intact, but transformed into something he could never have imagined. "Thank you for coming," Dawson said. His voice cracked with age and defeat and something that might have been genuine humility. Cheryl nodded but said nothing, moving slowly around the room like she was seeing it for the first time or perhaps for the last time. She looked at the portraits of Kappa ancestors still hanging on the walls. Stern men in expensive suits glaring down at the world with entitlement and arrogance. She touched the few remaining symbols of a dynasty built on fear and control, and Laurie stayed close to her, his presence a steady anchor in turbulent waters. "I was wrong," Dawson said suddenly, the words seeming to cost him everything he had left. "About everything. About you. About what makes a company strong. What makes a family real, what actually matters in this world." He paused, his throat working as he struggled to continue. "You were right. About leadership, about loyalty, about love, about everything I spent my whole life believing didn't matter." Cheryl stopped walking and turned to face him directly. Still, she said nothing, just waited with infinite patience for him to finish destroying himself with the truth. "I built an empire that needed enemies to survive," Dawson continued, his voice breaking now, tears starting to stream down his weathered face. "I thought strength came from fear, from controlling everything and everyone, from making sure no one could ever challenge my authority. I watched my son find real happiness, real love, and I tried to destroy it because I was terrified. Terrified that his life might expose how empty mine was, how hollow everything I built had always been." Hollis sobbed quietly, the sound barely audible, but somehow filling the vast empty room. Thessaly stared at the floor like she wanted it to open up and swallow her whole. "What you built," Dawson said, gesturing vaguely at Cheryl and Laurie and the colleagues standing behind them like an honor guard. "It's everything I pretended mine was. Real loyalty that doesn't need to be bought. Real strength that doesn't need fear to sustain it. A legacy that will last because it's built on something solid, something true, something that actually matters." Cheryl walked slowly toward him and he flinched slightly, perhaps expecting anger or cruelty. Instead, her voice was quiet and contemplative when she spoke, almost gentle in its absolute honesty. "You built an empire that required enemies to survive," she agreed, echoing his words back to him. "I built one that thrives on family, the family you choose, not the one you're born into. The family you create through mutual respect and genuine care, not the family you inherit through accident of birth." She turned to the 12 colleagues standing behind her, and her voice filled with warmth and pride. "These are my family. They followed me when I had nothing to offer, except honesty and respect, and the promise that I would never treat them as less than human. They worked beside me through poverty and attacks and doubt and fear. They believed when believing seemed insane. They're the reason we succeeded, because they understood that we were building something bigger than profit. something that mattered more than money. Cheryl looked back at Dawson, and her eyes held no cruelty, no triumph, just a kind of sad clarity. Your empire is crumbling, because it was always hollow at its core. Mine is growing because it's real, because it's built on foundations that can't be shaken by fear or lies or temporary setbacks. That's the difference between us. That's the difference between building with fear and building with love. Laurie stepped forward then, his hand finding Cheryl's instinctively, their fingers lacing together with the ease of long practice. He addressed his father directly, his voice firm but not cruel. You taught me that power was everything, that control and fear and dominance mattered most, that showing weakness was the worst sin imaginable. He looked at Cheryl with such profound love that several people in the room had to look away, taught me that love is the only thing, that treating people with dignity creates loyalty, that fear never can, that being vulnerable with the right person is the bravest thing you can do. You created an empire of fear. We created a family of choice. And only one of those things will survive the test of time. The room fell into profound silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and significant, like the moment before a storm breaks or after something irreplaceable shatters. Dawson's face seemed to collapse in on itself, every line deepening, every shadow darkening. He looked at his son, and the woman his son loved, saw how they stood together like two halves of one whole, and finally understood what he had lost while trying to hold on to things that never mattered. What happens now? Hollis asked tremulously, her voice barely above a whisper. Cheryl turned her gaze to her mother-in-law, and for the first time, something almost like compassion flickered across her face. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps understanding, the recognition that some people are too weak to be brave when bravery costs something. Now you learn to live with the choices you made, she said quietly. You chose silence over courage when your son needed you. You chose comfort over integrity when standing up would have mattered. You chose to look away when looking would have meant seeing your own complicity. Those choices have consequences. You get to keep your regrets. That's all I can offer you. Outside the vast windows, the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the empty halls of the estate. The house that had once hosted hundreds for elaborate parties now stood mostly vacant, a monument to power that had consumed itself from within like a fire burning through its own fuel. Cheryl and Laurie stood together in the center of the office, hands clasped, while the family that had rejected her now surrounded them in various states of brokenness and despair. It wasn't triumph that Cheryl felt looking at them. It was something more complex and harder to name. Sadness for what could have been if they had chosen differently. Relief for what was because she had survived their cruelty. And absolute certainty that she had made the right choices every step of the way. The 12 colleagues stood as witnesses to this final chapter, understanding that they were seeing something profound and rare. The complete inversion of power accomplished not through revenge or cruelty, but through simply living with integrity and refusing to compromise on what mattered. The meek inheriting the earth not through violence, but through persistence, not through destruction, but through creation. Dawson tried to speak again, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came. What was there left to say? He had built an empire on fear and watched it crumble like sandcastles before a tide. She had built one on love and watched it grow stronger with every challenge. The lesson was clear and brutal and absolutely final. Some foundations can withstand any storm. Others collapse at the first real test. The family members shifted uncomfortably, looking at each other, at Cheryl, at the floor, anywhere but directly at the reality of what they had lost through their own choices. They had mocked her, dismissed her, tried to destroy her, and she had not just survived, but thrived in ways that made their entire worldview seem small and petty and ultimately irrelevant. Cheryl took a deep breath, preparing to say the words that would either end this story or transform it into something unexpected. She looked at Laurie, and he nodded slightly, trusting her completely, supporting whatever choice she was about to make. I have something to say, Cheryl said quietly, her voice cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. And you will listen to every word. Chapter 10. The Empire rises from ashes. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the final power left to those who have already won everything. The Kappa family knelt before her in the grand hall. All of them. Even proud Dawson, lowering himself to his knees on the marble floor he had once walked across like a king. Hollis, Thessaly, the brothers and cousins and hangers-on who had built their identities on proximity to power that was now just memory. The 12 colleagues stood like silent sentinels behind Cheryl, a wall of loyalty and love that had been earned rather than inherited. Laurie remained at Cheryl's side, his hand in hers, his fingers warm and steady. She looked at their interlaced hands and drew strength from that simple connection, from the touch that had sustained her through poverty and attacks and moments when giving up would have been so much easier than continuing to fight. Cheryl walked forward slowly, her heels clicking against marble with a sound that echoed in the vast space. She stopped before Dawson, the man who had given her 5 minutes to clear her desk like she was garbage to be removed, who had tried to erase her from his son's life, who had weaponized every tool at his disposal to destroy her. You destroyed me once. Ah, she said, her voice clear and unwavering, each word falling like a stone into still water. You took everything from me except the one thing you could never touch, the man who loved me. You tried to bury me, to erase me, to prove I was nothing. But you forgot something crucial. Dawson's shoulders shook, tears streaming freely down his face now. You forgot that I am not soil to be covered. I am a seed, Cheryl continued, her voice growing stronger. And seeds grow strongest in darkness, pushing through concrete and stone, becoming trees that outlive the buildings that tried to contain them. She gestured to the colleagues behind her. I built myself from ashes, not for revenge, though that would have been satisfying. Not to prove you wrong, though you were wrong about everything that matters. I built myself from ashes because of love. Love for the man who chose me over everything. Love for the people who believed in me when belief was radical. Love for the work itself, for the possibility of creating something real in a world full of hollow illusions. Hollis sobbed openly. Thessaly couldn't meet Cheryl's eyes, her face crumpled with shame. Everything you see, my company, my success, my power, it grew from treating people like they matter, Cheryl said. From seeing human beings instead of instruments, from building trust instead of fear, from choosing integrity over convenience every single time. That's the difference between your empire and mine. The words hung in the air, gentle but devastating. I forgive you. Thunder in silence. The words landed like an earthquake, reshaping everything. Not because you deserve it, Cheryl continued quickly before anyone could mistake her meaning. Not because it changes the past or erases the harm you caused, but because I am finally completely free. Your hate, your rejection, your cruelty, it has no power over me anymore. I'm not carrying it anymore. I'm setting it down and walking away. Dawson looked up, his face ravaged by tears and regret. What we failed to see, he whispered, his voice hoarse and broken, was that you were everything we pretended to be. You built what I could not, a legacy that matters. Yes, Cheryl agreed simply, no triumph in her voice, just acknowledgement. I built a legacy of love, not fear, of respect, not control, of truth, not illusion. She turned to Laurie and he pulled her close, pressing her hand to his chest where his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. She smiled, that private smile reserved only for him, and their eyes spoke volumes that words could never capture. In his gaze, she saw everything they had survived together, every midnight on concrete floors, every shared meal of cheap noodles, every kiss in the rain, every moment they chose each other, when choosing each other cost them everything else. She saw their future stretching ahead, bright and boundless, built on foundations that would never crack. We're leaving now, Cheryl said, turning back to the kneeling family. You can keep your regrets and your empty halls. I have everything I need. As they walked toward the massive doors, Laurie leaned down and whispered in her ear, "I love you more than breath itself." She stopped in the middle of that grand hall, turned to him surrounded by the ruins of his family's empire, and kissed him deeply. A kiss containing every battle won, every night survived, every promise kept, every moment of choosing love over fear. The colleagues looked away respectfully, giving them this moment of intimacy in the wreckage of the old world. They walked out together, the 12 following behind in a procession that felt almost ceremonial. Outside, sunlight broke through the clouds in shafts of golden light, bathing them in warmth after so much cold darkness. Laurie pulled Cheryl close as they stood on the estate steps one final time. "Where to now, my love?" She smiled, fierce and free and unstoppable. "Forward, always forward." Inside the hollow mansion, Dawson watched through the window as his son and daughter-in-law climbed into their car, surrounded by people who would follow them anywhere, not because they had to, but because they chose to. He finally understood with brutal clarity. He hadn't lost his son to a woman. He had lost everything to his own arrogance, his own fear, his own inability to love anything more than power, and they had built an empire on the one foundation that never crumbles. As their car disappeared down the long driveway, Cheryl leaned against Laurie's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his arm around her, the absolute certainty of his presence. They were driving toward a future built not on revenge or bitterness, but on the unshakable truth that two people who truly choose each other can conquer anything the world throws at them. "We did it," she whispered. We're still doing it," he corrected gently, kissing her temple. "Every day. Together. That's the beautiful part. We never stop choosing each other." She kissed his jaw, his cheek, finally his lips when they stopped at the estate gates. Behind them, the mansion grew smaller in the mirrors, a monument to a past that had no power over their future, a warning about what happens when you build with fear instead of love. The 12 colleagues rode in the cars behind them, already talking about tomorrow's projects and next week's expansion and next month's innovations. They were a family now, bound not by blood but by choice, by struggle survived together, by a woman who had taught them that dignity and integrity were worth more than any paycheck could ever be. Cheryl and Laurie drove toward the city as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and rose and purple. They had started with nothing but each other and built something that would outlast them. They had chosen love when cruelty would have been easier, integrity when compromise would have been simpler, truth when lies would have been more convenient. And they had won in the way that really mattered. They had become exactly who they wanted to be. Unbroken by hatred, unbowed by adversity, unstoppable in their commitment to each other and to building something real together. The end was just another beginning,